Welcome to the Pixel Retentive Podcast, where we, a business owner and an artist, discuss the business of art and the art of business. Hey friends, I'm Carl, founder of Epic Made, and I'm the host of the Pixel Retentive Podcast, where we share our thoughts on creativity, art, and business. Past guests include Matt Garrison of Dash Studios, Laura Naspali of Mesh and Movement, and Sam Simmons of Mint Pass. We are forever grateful for the supporters of our podcast, and we are always looking for more sponsors. That said, Pixel Retentive is brought to you by the creative gurus at Epic Made. Epic Made is a team of strategists and artists who excel in visual storytelling. Our studio crafts unforgettable animation and illustration that not only captivates your audience, but also drives tangible business results. We specialize in engaging imaginative pop culture savvy audiences with beloved clients like Nickelodeon, WWE, and Sci-Fi. Visit getepicmade.com and let's collaborate on your next creative campaign. All right, got that out of the way. With us today, we have Tom Bolger. Welcome, Tom.
Hey, Carl. How are you? It's good to see you.
Doing really well. Good to see you as well, friend. All right, so Tom is the Executive Creative Director at RBB. With experience at Anomaly and Wieden+Kennedy in New York, he's led award-winning work for brands like PETA, Oreo, and Project Gutenberg, and mentored emerging creative talent through the One Club. A practicing visual artist, he has exhibited in New York, LA, and Miami, including Art Basel. All right, that's quite a little intro there. You've done some cool shit. I love it, Tom.
Yeah, I'm just old. You know what
It happens to the best of us, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's a truncated bio at this point, and there's, for every flower, there's a pile of poo. There's an equally sort of not good or nice thing that I've done. So,
hey, right. That's how you get good, right? You have to be okay with making literally a bunch of shit, and you get to the point where you make really good shit, right? So it's part of the journey, right? I tell people that all the time when they're like, oh, you're such a great artist, you do this so well. It's like, you should see the beginning. Nobody starts great. Like, some people start so early they don't remember how terrible they were, but we all create shit when we start, like, for sure. Anyways. So before we jump into today's topic, I want our audience to get to know you a little bit better. So tell us how long you've been in the industry and the project you are most proud of so far.
Okay. So yeah, I would say I have been working in advertising and marketing now for 17 years, 18 years. So I worked I worked in editorial publishing. I launched a lot of magazines in New York in the late 90s and early 2000s.
Nice.
And editorial publishing started to present itself as a dinosaur to me with the onset of the internet, really, that, about the time that I got a Gmail account, it became really clear that, the writing was on the wall.
Yeah.
So I started to try and figure out where I wanted to go next, and had done other things before then. I went to art school. I'd worked as an illustrator in New York, other things. But I had a couple of friends of mine who had made the transition from magazines. A buddy of mine worked at a magazine called Complex, which was Mark Echo's magazine. There's a blast from the past. The guy that used to make terrible jeans, but he had a really good magazine at one point.
Okay.
Mike had gone over there from the magazine organization we were working at, and he had made the transition to an advertising agency. So I started talking to him about that and kind of shadowed him a little bit. I also shadowed a chef for 6 months because I thought about becoming a cook, but I ate commercial kitchens, and as it turned out, I really liked what was on offer in the agency world, which was sort of, the opportunity to immerse yourself in a brand and help them solve problems through creative communications, and it turned out that I was pretty good at that. So about 2005, 2006 is when I started freelancing with him, and then I made the full transition in 2007. And so since then, I've been working, Yeah.
Sounds like a fun little journey. Not all who wander are lost, as they say, right? You're just out there exploring.
It was very humbling because I had a director title at the publishing company that I worked at,
Gotcha.
and had, climbed to a certain position, and then literally, cut to 6 months later, and I was building toolkits, marketing toolkits for like Powerade, like their shelf talker and their, and I was sitting there like cutting out um D-Wade, from a sports photo and like turning him into a life-size cardboard cutout, was not sexy work. But for every, 4 or 5 hours that I did that, I got to sit in on a pitch or, work on a comp or come up with a strategy, and those were the things that were really interesting to me. And kind of what propelled me and made me not just a guy who was doing production in an advertising agency, but a student of the industry and somebody who's interested in, and I don't like the word passionate about, but passionate about just being a part of that world and doing that kind of work.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, man. When you put the right mind in the right place, you just soak up everything, right? And just excited about it. Just like, oh, that's how that works. I love that. And kind of helps you understand the whole process. And then also when you get to be in charge of people, lets you have a lot of empathy and not be an asshole, right? You get like, when people are not pulling their weight and when they're doing their best and it's just not working, right? So.
Yeah, being able to differentiate those two things, I think, is having good taste and being able to build the right team, I think, are the two most important qualities in a good creative or creative director.
I love that. I love that. Well, that pulls us into today's subject, as it were. We're going to be discussing creative direction and strategy for content creation in the big leagues. So, love to just sort of kind of roll into that. Like, what are some things that happen, that you say like a big transition between like, hey, this is not the big leagues, but these things in the big leagues are, what's the big differentiator you think on the strategy and workflow there?
So are you talking about, I'm not sure if I understand the question.
Sure. Like when you're working with a small client versus a client with like just a big budget or more experimental, those types of things, right?
Yeah. What's the difference? What differentiates the two besides budget, you mean?
Yeah, I think just like where. So for me, right, when we're operating in creating strategy, like looking at like the resources of the company and going, hey, we've got to do this right, so we can't take the craziest risk, right? Because we got one shot at this, right? Versus like some of these other, if you have a bigger opportunity on your plate, right? Like sometimes they have more budgets for like, hey, we can try one kind of safe play, one crazy one, and one over here and see kind of more guess and check, I guess. What was my thoughts behind it? But like,
Oh no,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that's, I mean, I have examples. I didn't work on this, but I got to see it happen. So this
sure,
was, do you remember the Old Spice campaign? The I'm on a horse campaign.
yeah,
Right. So you know how that, how Wyden landed that work. And again, I was in New York. This all happened at the mothership in Portland. So this was not work I was a part of. I don't want to claim it.
okay,
But so they got that work by basically going to Old Spice and saying, give us your worst. Give us the worst performing brand in your portfolio, and we'll turn it into your best seller. And they did that. That's how the whole, I forget the name of the actor that they were working with. Um, but and my point about this is I got to watch them basically in real time take that guy, in his towel, and they were shooting actual responses to people who were posting. And at the time, and again, this is over 10 years ago, this is 12, 15 years ago at this point, they were posting on Instagram, on Reddit, on Twitter. Like they would film him actually live, like responding to a specific tweeter or a specific Redditor, specific Instagrammer, and that kind of thinking, right? So that's fundamentally creative led thinking,
yeah, absolutely.
which is, I think that's part of it. I think you have to differentiate. Part of it is about need. Part of it is about the objective, right? And part of it is about the audience. And I think that setting money aside, really considering those three things, like who are we talking to, what do we want to say to them, and what do we need them to do. I think that should be driving, your creative strategy in large part. And I think what happens far too often with smaller companies who don't have big budgets to play around with is they kind of put the cart before the horse. They make it way more about them than it is about their audience, because it's like, oh, I've got $150,000 spent to get me from here to the end of the year. So I have in every communication, I have to list every reason to believe. I have to list every benefit. I have to, you know what I mean? And it's wall to wall, like we do this and this and this and this and this, and all of the important things about the product, about the service, about whatever it is, have to be at the forefront of their message at all times. And you don't convert that way. You don't pull anybody in and tell them an interesting story when all you're doing is talking about yourself, right? It's the same way in any other form of communication, from having a conversation with somebody that you want to be friends with, or somebody that you want to go on a date with, or, somebody that you're teaching, whatever. It's that, it's this, you lose the fundamental human quality of communication in order to basically turn that into a laundry list of your perceived benefits and the reasons why people should pick you, and thus put yourself in a position to have no one pick you.
Yeah. And it's that, right? Like their overwhelming desire becomes this real needy, desperate cry, and everything's bold, right? There is no hierarchy. Nothing's leading the conversation. You're not actively considering, hey, this is the number one pain point that we're trying to solve for our number one audience that we've created this specific campaign for. Yeah. We've all seen a lot of that.
Not taking the audience first approach. And it's hard too, because, it's one thing to be, like Verizon was a client that I worked on for a long time at the last agency that I worked at. And you're talking about a company that spends in the billions on advertising a year, right? They're a $42 billion a year company, I believe.
Right.
And it's, in revenue. And I think, I think 2.5% of that goes back into, or not 2.5. Yeah. Like literally $1.5 billion or $2 billion a year. They have the opportunity to build a communication, funnel, what we call a funnel, right? From awareness, consideration down to conversion. I'm sure people who are watching this know what a funnel is. They have the opportunity to build not just one, but like 16 of those, right? Mm-hmm. And they have the opportunity to take their market share and differentiate it down to, they're an acculturated Hispanic millennial. They're an unacculturated Hispanic baby boomer, and have two separate messages for those two audiences, and so they understand how to reach. It's not even understanding, right? Like it's just, what's the saying? Quantity has a quality all of its own. You know?
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know, man. It's tough. It's tough to get clients with small budgets and not a lot of sophistication or immersion. They don't have professional marketing departments. They don't have anybody on their side advocating for what works. So they always want one of two things. They want the, the breakthrough creative that's going to go viral and, and get them on the front page of YouTube, which you're not going to do. Unless you're that, do you see that Chinese sign maker, Tony something?
Yo, Tony, that guy was so talented though.
Yeah.
His voice impressions were ridiculous. It's like I watched all of that. I wanted to buy a sign. I didn't even know who he was.
And again, that is somebody who, I don't know if he owns that company, but if he doesn't own that company, he's been working there for a long time. That's his life. And he just happens to be an incredibly talented performer on top of everything else. You know what I mean?
Hey, yo, it's Tony. Dude, it was so good.
The amount of lightning bolts that have to strike the same place.
Right.
Happen, like even communicating that to an unsophisticated business owner that needs marketing, it's a tough thing to do.
Yeah. One thing I always advocate for when the budgets are not like, hey, we can afford to fail on, $1 million of this as long as the other, 500,000 to $1 million works, those kind of giant hedges, or I mean, that's not even, it's relative to whatever markets, but it's like what you said, Verizon does, like having these very sick, like every business needs to do that, right? You need to go, even especially the smaller ones, arguably, like what's the data like? Who are your best, your best demographic? What does that look like? Let's put a very specialized message in front of them, make that successful, and then expand into other campaigns, because we're much more likely to hit a specific target than we are to shotgun blast out into the ether and hope we get something, right? And that shotgun blast approach, or the throw spaghetti at a wall, or all these different, euphemisms that people use, like we're just lighting money on fire, and it never feels good.
One of my chief jobs is being a counselor, is being a subject matter expert, and I cannot tell you how much time I spend getting my clients to actually focus on their fucking goals. Like I can't do everything because you've got two nickels to rub together, right? So where do you want to be in 18 months, man? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to share shift? Are you growing market share? Does anybody know who you are? Is this about awareness? Is this about, trying to move into a new market, and it's always just growth. And it's like, well, that's great, but what does that mean? Have you looked at the last 18 months of your sales data? Do you have anything to tell me about how your product is performing in the marketplace that I can use, to make a hype, because all good creative is just like taking a strategic hypothesis and then trying to find either the funny or the story or the essential in truth that I can put in front of somebody who may want to buy what you're offering, and so the amount of clients that I encounter who cannot articulate what it is that they're actually trying to do besides these really broad, like, increase revenue and grow this and grow that, but like don't have any, you're on the internet too, man. You should know who is coming to buy your product. You should have some sense of who that person is.
Yeah.
And if you can tell me who they are, I can find a way to communicate with them. I can find the story that they may want to hear, and and I know the channels that they're consuming on, I'm pretty good at. So, so much of my part is about that strategic counsel. And I wish a lot of my clients, and I'll give you an example. I had a good example actually. Is one of the best briefs I've gotten in the last 18 months came from this mid-size accounting firm out of, I think they're in West Palm Beach, and they started a digital transformation practice. And they had this, I could have kissed the woman who wrote it because it was so good. Like, she knew who she was talking to. She knew what she wanted to say. She knew who she wanted to say it to. Right. So all I had to do was come up with, do the things that I do, is find out the best way to communicate, what this digital transformation practice could mean to her core, target consumer. And it really does not happen as often as it should, and go ahead.
What were some of the things in there that were really remarkable to you?
I can probably find the brief.
Let's go. Yeah.
I'm not going to share it.
Oh, I'm just saying, Mike.
Yeah. Um. Let me see, and you can, I'm sure, edit this out, right?
Yeah, we really don't do a whole lot of editing. We just kind of keep it straight. So maybe just like censor any particular nouns, or you don't need a screen share or anything. Just
No, I'm not going to screen share.
yeah, just read some details that you feel comfortable with. No pressure. No.
Let me see if I can find this.
Yeah, we usually just live roll these, man. Just if I took all the time to edit them and polish every single one to like the level of I don't know, I think it loses some of its organic conversationness, if that's a statement I can get away with. And also like anything I can do to keep the production costs down, and so that I could just keep making as many as possible. All right, like
No, I hear you, man.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, she just basically, I was fortunate because this woman she had a grounding in marketing, right? So she had a clear objective for what she wanted the campaign to do. She had target audiences. She had too many target audiences, but from at least from there, we were able to pull out key psychographic and demographic data, right? And really hone in on the person who was most likely to want to interact with the message. She knew who her stakeholders was. She knew what the key messages were for her serving or for her service. And she was able to give us a sense of their competition. You know what I mean? So just,
yeah.
And, really being able to, and I think if you can keep track of those 4 vectors, and you don't have to know, right? You don't have to have like, nobody's expecting you to turn into, a strategist and have all the qual and all the quant and do focus groups and do IDIs and do surveys, but like just to at least know who's interacting with you on the day to day. You know what I mean? What have you tried that's worked? What have you tried that's failed? Like what, but no, it was a good brief.
I love that.
One of those, yeah.
It's definitely frustrating when you talk to a client like, oh, we just need to grow. Like, well, that's good. We all need to grow, right? Like, where have you had success? Where have you had failures? What is your most profitable line of business? Like, who buys that? How do we get in front of them? Like, what does that look like? Why do they buy this? Right? Like asking the important questions. Yeah. And like you said, when they have an internal marketing team, like, and they know, like, that's when like the magic can really happen, when you have all the right people kind of, you assemble that Voltron, if you will, right? I love that. I love it when you get in a good spot with people that really understand the need for good creative and understand narrative and understand like the whole thing. And they just really need the specialist to kind of add in their secret sauce. And like, and then like when our team works on stuff and we get to really just get through the first part, kind of evaluate all that strategy, and then really execute the creative. Like that's where we get super excited. All creatives like love that part, right? But if you don't have the fundamentals in there, like we talked about before, if you don't have the fundamentals right, it doesned matter like what the creative is, and it like in either direction. It could be AI garbage, but if the fundamentals are right and you have the right message themed through there, it could be more effective than a wildly amazing piece of creative that had the wrong fundamentals. So.
Absolutely. And it really is, particularly now, where, it's production values are becoming, we're in a weird place with production values. We're in a weird place with the appearance of where the money is being spent. You know what I mean? In terms of how good the creative looks, because we're competing with, a bunch of 22-year-old kids with iPhones, who are content creators, influencers who are doing these brand deals, and they're growing market share. They're doing what they're being asked to do. And often they're doing it with very little feedback from the client. And they're way more, adaptable and, probably cost effective sometimes than we can be. But, there are a lot of things that they can't do. They can't take a digital transformation campaign and make it interesting. So it really is just, It's just a question of exactly what you said. It's putting the right message in front of the right person at the right time. I mean, that's really a fundamental part of our job. And, my job is the message, right? And the strategy and the look and feel that goes into that message. And to a certain degree, the timing and the platform that it's going on. But if I don't know who I'm talking to, then I can't say anything of value.
100%, right? 100%. You could just think about, like, if anybody listening, like the types of people that all the way from like the most like stodgy, conservative, like stoic person that like barely says two things, and when they do, they're extremely calculated and they thought about it for 20 seconds before they open their mouth, to like the most hyperactive ADD young person, like you have to communicate to those people in different ways. And those are all different markets and different types of consumers. So there's no one message that hits all people. Typically speaking, like, it has to come in different ways, or at least it'll be received better by some audiences than others, right? So what are some of like your favorite campaigns? You don't necessarily have to have worked on them, but like, love to hear some of your just like, oh man, this was amazing. I mean, obviously if you did work on them, love to hear about some of those. So, but
Some of the classics. I mean, I talked about one, which was that Old Spice campaign, which was just a joy to watch come to life. It's so jealous that, nobody in New York really got to touch that. Until it was old hat. It got passed off to, and I was long gone from Wieden at that point. But I got to go back to the classics. I mean, the things that kind of made me want to get into the business in the first place, like the old school Economist ads. I don't know if you're familiar with those. Mm-hmm. Economist ran this campaign probably through the 80s and 90s, where it was, it was all just, I like really smart, really funny copy. I like the challenge of trying to, and it really is, it was like, good advertising professionals were trying to get it done in 142 characters like 50 years ago. You know what I mean? Like it really is trying to distill that message down to one perfect headline. And The Economist obviously is a publication that is kind of was sought after and read by, very intelligent people and people who worked on Wall Street, people who worked in finance. And the ad that they launched with, I'm probably going to butcher this, but it was like, I never read The Economist. It was the quote, I never read The Economist. And it was like, James Young, management trainee, age 42, and it was just like this really funny, pithy, and it was all about these headlines. And
that's awesome.
Yeah. And then, and the old Volkswagen ads, which, from the 60s and 70s, which were super copy heavy. And it was back when this was Ogilvy and Mather did those ads, right? Ogilvy wrote them. And it was really this back when people would sit with the magazine, that would be the night's entertainment, and they'd actually go through and read the advertising. I don't ever expect that to come back, but the care and attention to detail and the craft storytelling that was put in those things was really, really amazing. More recently, things that I've seen that I've really liked, I think that there are some people who are doing, YouTube stuff, YouTube pre-roll first, that have done pretty well, some pretty interesting things. There was a Swedish, and I'm not going to, it's like Native. Do you know Native, the body soap?
Yep.
Yeah, there was another Swedish one that did that, and it was in the same category, but it was basically just their whole claim to fame was like, if you use us, you won't stink, and it was all digital first. I'm not going to be able to remember the name of it. But in terms of things that I've worked on, that I'm proud of, there was the Best for a Good Reason campaign for Verizon. Was a we got to when I worked at the Community, which was the last sort of creative led advertising agency I was at. We set up this documentary style newsroom and did like 600 pieces of content over a year talking about the life of Verizon's network. And doing it through the lens of the people who worked on it every day. And, one of the big challenges with Verizon, when they went through their rebrand back in 2015, 2016, was the big strategic insight there was Verizon is not a telephone company. It is a technology company that,
Oh.
that where the phone is, they don't sell the product, right? That's a byproduct of what they've built, which is the network. And really, making that pivot and telling that story. And obviously this is Verizon's 16 partner agencies. This is the work of thousands of people, both internal and external to Verizon to tell that story. But the part that we got to tell was this really personal, we got to follow them through, the team of the community got to follow them through hurricanes and snowstorms and, see them on their best day and their worst day. And like, here's what we're doing in the run up to the Super Bowl. And here's what we're doing after Irma hit. And it just, it was just a really, really powerful campaign. And one of the best things I got to be a part of. And we've done, goofy shit like, create I think I threw it away. I don't have it anymore. I got to create bespoke packaging for Oreo. We did this whole thing, the Oreo, like back when disclosure was starting to happen. So this would have been in 2020. We got to create this Oreo, like, alien experience where it was basically it's called The Offering. And, some of the team got to go and they built a crop circle in like the middle of Wisconsin. And we did this whole spot about aliens coming down and like taking our cookie. And we got to build this custom packaging for this limited edition, like this LTO, Oreo thing. That was fun and it felt really timely, really current. And I'm going to forget his name. The guy who led that work, was our CCO at the time, Frank. I'm not gonna be able to remember his name, but just getting to a seat at the table to watch, that come to life really quickly. Because a lot of the times it takes 18 months, for these things to get out the door in creative led, particularly because you're working with these giant companies and there's so many layers and levels and so much bureaucracy, but Mondelez, which is the parent company of Oreo, this is why it's so key and critical to have a good partner, on the other side of the divide, who's going to hold hands with you and believes in the idea. Because, we were able to, it was 3 months from concept to execution. We hit our market, we hit our target and got them huge reach. That was millions and millions and millions of people saw that campaign and interacted with it. And it happened. I'm not going to say it was cheap, right? It was certainly not the most expensive thing that Mondelez did that year, and it would not have been possible without a good client. So there's just a few of the things that I've really,
That's really cool. And I'm thinking in the difference in the, larger clients versus more like even smaller or mid-size, but like, Oreo, I can imagine, like, I was really curious about what's the point of, or like, early on in my design career, it was interesting for me. It's like, why does Oreo do this? Like, what would be the point of investing whatever that was, right? And it's literally just putting you back top of mind, because nobody discovered Oreo in that campaign, right? Like no one was like, oh my God, I've never heard of this cookie, right? Like everybody knows what the fucking Oreo is, but putting it back top of your mind when you're at the grocery store drives sales, right? Like that's the whole thing, but like, I'd be interested to hear like, some of the, like your thoughts around some of that. Like, I don't know if you know what I'm asking.
So why does Coca-Cola advertise, or why does Oreo advertise? Why bother?
Right. Yeah. I guess why bother? Like,
so
I know the answer, but it's,
yeah, no, for me, I think it's really, I think it's it's about more than share of mind. It's about more than market share. It's about these companies are made up by people who want to be proud of the work that they're doing, in part, not everybody by any strong imagination. But I think that there is, one of the ways I think through the latter half of the 20th century, certainly, and into the 20th century, that there is this desire to be culturally relevant that I think runs through all of us. And I think that is often given life and voice through the act of consumerism. And I'm not saying that I agree with that. That's a whole other conversation that I don't know that this podcast is equipped to have. And I don't know if I'd have a job at the end of this podcast.
Fair.
Felt about that. But I think there is this desire to not just be a part of culture, but to drive the conversation, right? And you hear that all the time. We want to drive the conversation. We want to drive the conversation. Such a cliche. And it makes me want to hang myself every time I hear a marketing flack from one of these companies say it. But it is I think there's a very base human desire in there, And it's like, Mitt Romney got a lot of shit for calling corporations people, and he was right to. But corporations are made up of people, and they have these base human desires, and it's interesting and weird to see how they begin to present themselves through our culture and how much of our culture has devolved into advertising. So I think that's I think I'm probably mangling some very basic, psychology 101. I'm an art school dropout. I don't know what to tell you. That's psychology 101 term, right? Like, gestalt. I don't know, but like, I think there is this real and true desire to, surprise and delight. It's why I got into this fucking industry, and I wanted to make people laugh, or I wanted to make people think. And I'm not pretty enough to be an actor or talented enough to be a stand-up comedian. So I fucking do advertising, so worse at this point.
I love it. Yeah. The human connection, that's what like threads through all this, right? We want to feel connected. We want to feel relevant. We want the things we're a part of to mean something. That's deep. That's ingrained in our DNA, an interesting meme that popped into my head while you were talking was just like, 6-year-olds these days can identify like hundreds of different logos of different corporations and products, and like almost no plants in the wild, like right. And like you go back, in America, at least 500-600 years to more indigenous people, and there, it's the opposite of like there aren't even brands and logos, right? Like I mean, there might be some brand marks, but I don't even know what that would look like in an indigenous culture. I'm sure they had some variations of that.
It's a weird time in our species.
Yeah, it really is.
To see how it's remembered a couple of centuries from now. Probably not if it's remembered at all.
Yeah, if we're here still, hopefully, right? Like, Jesus.
I hope there's some fond consternation. Like, what the fuck were these people thinking about?
What happened when everyone just worshipped a bunny for too many generations? Anyways, I digress.
To your point though, not the logos, but that deep,
cultural relevance and the
cultural relevance. It's like that's the flag that I try to plant with my clients. You know what I mean? Where there is you have an opportunity, even through marketing communication, to be fundamentally human with the people that you are trying to communicate with. So why not do that?
Yeah,
because you're not going to fool anybody.
No.
And particularly these smaller, and I am, I don't work in creative led anymore. RBB Communications is a marketing and PR agency. It's a damn good one, and I'm really proud to be there. You know what I mean? But we are more concerned with mid-cap B2B and professional services. Consumer is something we do. We do it very well. But, a lot of the clients who come to us because we build relationships that last for years, if not decades,
Yeah.
And the reason and how we've done that and the discipline that I've learned here is how to take my client's side in a really fundamental way, and in order to do that, I have to give them clear counsel. And it is always that. It's like, let's take the money that you have and be human beings with it, and be human first, and if you can legitimately solve a problem, right, let's just tell that, in a very simple and straightforward way, and it can be funny, or it can be warm, or it can be what have you, the tone can change depending on how you want to represent yourself out there in the market or to your audience. But that fundamental honesty and humanity has to be at the core of what we're trying to do. And you and I, as client and agency, need to be aligned on that. And if we're not, it doesn't matter how much money you give me, because I'm not going to be able to meet your goals. Like, it just doesn't matter. And the best brands, that I have found in my career had people at the helm who understood that,
Yeah, without a doubt. Man, that's powerful and so true. No one buys products from a company. They don't relate to companies. They relate to the ideas and the people and the representation that all goes into that. It's not about like the logo. It's like, what does all that mean? I mean, you saw the Nike ad, I'm sure, in the Super Bowl commercial. Like, that was powerful, right? Like, it was just, look at all these like amazingly badass women just rising above. Like, they're just like, the world tells you can't do whatever and you're gonna fucking do it. And and the shots and the cinematography, like, that was amazing. And what were they selling? Like, they didn't say buy our shoes. They didn't say like none of that. It was.
And again, because Nike, Verizon too, Nike, these big brands, again, what they're selling is this concept of something. Nike is selling this concept of like personal excellence. They might sell, and they're really, really good at it. And they are. Wieden taught them how to do it.
Yeah.
And I got to touch a lot of that work while I was at Wieden, New York. And again, I was in more of a production role than a creative role at that time, but got to work on, Jordan Lifestyle for a long time, got to do and see a lot of the way that they thought about building and creating, work. And everybody over there understood that they were a mission-based company, at least when it came to their communications. We can get into their sins, and I'm sure people will,
Oh, without a doubt. Yeah. Yeah.
But, who they build their shoes for and why they're building them are a different story. For sure.
For sure, man. And it's it's just cool to think. And it's back into that same thing I said earlier. Like, no one saw that ad and discovered Nike for the first time, right? And when your company and the brand you're working on, the goal is no longer like, product aware and like all that sort of stuff on the funnel. It's just like, what are we like? What kind of lifestyle? What kind of consciousness are we trying to relate to and infuse it?
They have the opportunity to create this fundamental feeling, right? It's almost a Pavlovian response to when they see the brand and this feeling. And again, that's pretty sinister, but like that's where we are. That's the reality of it.
Yeah.
And I caution smaller brands to not necessarily try to do that, and it's not always what, I hate it when the Gary Vayners of the world, talk to Joe Schmo and his Amazon store and talk to him about brand building. And they cite these, $100 billion a year companies as examples of what they should be. You can't fucking do that.
No,
you're never going to be able. You need 60 years and several $1 billion to do that. You can't do that. So you need to just communicate honestly.
Yeah, it's like, trying to go head to head with a elephant, right? Like, it's just never going to happen. Like, you got to out brute force the most giant brute force things on the planet. You got to out strategize them. You have to come in different angles and different consciousness and hold different. You got to play a different game that they can't do.
Well, that's where the whole concept of challenger brands came from, which is like an old school idea at this point. But that, it really is just, you've got to play a different game, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, well, that's as good place as any to start winding down here. We are up on time. So the last question I wanted to ask you, is there anyone or anything in your career that you'd like to shout out to the audience? Maybe a mentor, a valuable resource, favorite client?
I mean, I've met so many just amazing people in my career that have, whether they knew it or not, shown me, something about what kind of person I should be, not necessarily what kind of creative I should be or creative director, I had a studio manager at Anomaly, a guy named Steve Harris. And he was one of the most patient and kind men I've ever met. And he fired me, and he was right to fire me, but I was ready to go. We got into a huge fight. I was working 90 hours a week. I was like, I was fucking done. I was running a side business, like doing web design, making like $40,000 a month, like on the side. And I'm like, as soon as I get here, like I'm fucking out. And it was like this race to see whether I was going to quit or he was going to fire me first. And he fired me about a month before I was ready to go. But he taught me how to build a team and how to be kind under a difficult situation, you know? So even some of the more challenging relationships that I've had, like my last boss, or the guys who ran the last agency that I worked at, they were really challenging guys. They were not easy men to work with, but they both taught me so much about what it means to give a shit about what we do and why it's important. And it's not because we are servicing these multi-million or multi-billion-dollar brands, but it's about being true to our team and showing up for our team and being a part of, And then the last person I would like to shout out, and I'm sure a lot of people who are watching the show know who he is, and he's not somebody that I know, but is a copywriter named George Tannenbaum, he's become quite the influencer on LinkedIn. He's an older guy, boomer, if not older than boomer. He's, I think, pushing 70 at this point. He's this old, cantankerous, hilarious guy who, I think got his start in the late 70s or early 80s. And he got pushed out of one of the big holding companies like a Publicis or a WPP. And he started his own agency. And he's just one of the smartest, most honest, funniest copywriters I've ever encountered in my entire life. I highly recommend that you look him up and look at what he's doing, and not just what he's doing, but how he approaches what he does. It's had a huge impact and informed like my approach, to the craft. And that's it. Those are the ones that I would shout out.
I love it. And what was that word you used? Cantankerous? Was that?
Cantankerous.
Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic. Awesome. And wanted to give a big shout out to LinkedIn. That's where we met, doing some networking. I think I DM'd your boss, and your boss was like, "Hey, talk to this guy." And then
you sent her Christine Barney is one of the most deeply human and amazing people that I've ever worked with, and she's taught me more about just leading with empathy and how to interact with clients, I think, than anybody else in my career. But yeah, and shout out to LinkedIn too, for sure.
Love it. All right, so we've been talking to Tom Bolger, who is the Executive Creative Director at RBB. You can check out their website at rbbcommunications.com. But if listeners want to follow up with you directly, where should they go?
They can shoot me an email at tbolger@rbbpr.com.
All right. Sounds good. Cool. Well, I will get that on the show notes as well. And thanks so much for being on the show, Tom. And until next time.
My pleasure, Clark. Thanks for inviting
me. We really hope you enjoyed the show. Please like and subscribe to join us on our next journey through the world of art and business on the Pixel Retentive Podcast.